I hear so many Christians murmuring about their imperfections and their failures and their addictions and their shortcomings. And I see so little war. Murmur, murmur, murmur. Why am I this way? Make war!
Of course, we're talking about pride this morning. We're talking about pride because we are focused on waging war against that which wages war against us. Today's lesson, and well, potentially next Sunday's as well, is so important. Because if we don't come to grips and to terms with the things that we're going to talk about today, the rest of the war, it's already lost. In my opinion, this is one of the most crucial and critical aspects of who we are that we have to gain control over, that we have to come to grips with, that we have to be able to deal with and remove even from our lives if it is the case that we want to be able to stand having done all there is to stand. And of course, we're talking about pride. Pride is sometimes referred to as the cause of all sin. Pride has the power to turn us into fault-finding, harsh-spirited, superficial, and defensive people. It has the power to cause us to be blind to our own weaknesses, thereby losing the opportunity to grow. It makes you feel entitled, like you have arrived, like you have nothing else to learn from other people. It makes you want to be the center of attention. It makes us stubborn. Even when you know that you're wrong, it keeps you from saying that you're sorry. It's pride. It makes you think you're invincible. It makes you act out of character to make sometimes meaningless points. It makes you unwilling to acknowledge the fact that you actually need help. It keeps us from coming to grips with who we really are in our weaknesses. And it causes us to be, quite bluntly, people that are just not fun to be around. And that's pride. Pride is very sneaky. Just because you don't think that you're prideful, just because you don't think that you see pride in your heart, does not mean that you're not prideful. We can be prideful without even knowing it, because pride blinds us and causes us to see ourselves through a lens that distorts reality. That's how good or evil pride is. It has the power to paint our sinfulness as beautiful and commendable. Pride turns people off. It destroys unity, fellowship, and any potential good that might come out or that might be done through us. It is destructive, and it has the power to take us places both spiritually and emotionally that we should never, ever go. That's pride. So what does the Bible have to say about pride? Well, the Bible actually has a lot to say about pride. In fact, it has more than I could cover today or within this month. In fact, the Bible uses specific terms to talk about pride, but it also uses other words that are illustrations of pride, like envy and jealousy and anger. Yes, these things oftentimes come out of pride, but there are two main words in the New Testament that are oftentimes translated as pride. And this is what those words mean. And so when you read the word pride or boastful, this is what we're talking about this morning. Two main words. This is what they mean. Simply put, empty talk. Bragging that is empty. In other words, they're lies. It's a facade. It's nothing but a shell or a mask. What you're presenting, whether through words or actions or as a person, is empty. It is not real. It's like what Jesus says, outside you're whitewashed, but inwardly you're like tombs filled with dead men's bones. That's the word pride. It's also used in the sense of an empty assurance, which trusts in its own power and resources. It's used in the sense of arrogance. It's a swollen view of oneself that causes you to look down upon others and even treat them with insolence and contempt. That's pride. And the Bible uses tons of scriptures and tons of illustrations of what that looks like, and then even words or demonstrations of what this pride does and what it causes and the effect that it ends up having. It's a domino effect, and it just keeps going and going. It's the reason why Peter says, 1 Peter 5, verse 5, a passage that majority of us, if not all of us, know really well. God opposes the proud, but favors the humble, or gives grace to the humble. I want you to just park it right there just for a second and think about this. God opposes the proud. The word oppose means to set oneself against in battle. We're talking about waging war against the things that wage war against us. But pride keeps us from waging that war. Instead, we wage war against God. He opposes, he stands against in battle those who are proud, yet he favors or gives grace to the humble. Proverbs 16:8 says this. Pride, and these are two passages that I think sum it up. This is another passage that we know really well. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And Jesus actually illustrates this point in Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14, which I want to read. Then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else. Two men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a despised tax collector. Two people who are actually in the same category. There's not much difference between the two. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. I thank you, God, that I am not a sinner like everyone else. For I don't cheat, I don't sin, and I don't commit adultery. In other words, I have arrived. I'm certainly not like the tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give you 1/10 of my income. But the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow. This is a picture of humility. He beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "O God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner." I tell you, Jesus' words, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who would exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. That's the picture the Bible paints about pride. Its dangers, its effects, essentially how God views this. Now, we can go on and talk about tons of scriptures, and I can bring in tons of passages, and we can continue to talk about pride. And it's important for us to talk about this, because if we don't get a grip with this, it will keep us from actually waging war against the things that wage war against us. It will keep us from acknowledging the sin and cause us to hide in a closet, not willing to confess. It'll keep us from seeing the temptation as it is being thrown at us, referred to as the fiery darts of Satan. Pride will keep us from being aware of the situations in which we're in, how these things are happening, how we're being tempted, and the things that we're actually doing that are affecting us, that are causing us, that are separating us from God, keeping us from being people who are disciples of Jesus. So it's important that we talk about these things. And if you would like to talk further about what Scripture, specifically passages that have to say about this, come talk to me and we'll set up a time and we'll have a little Bible study and we'll talk about this. the Bible does have a lot to say about pride. It's pretty much summed up, however, in the passages that I have just given you. God opposes the proud because pride comes before a fall, because pride exalts yourself when God is about his glory. When we exalt ourselves, God is not exalted. He is not glorified. Pride causes us to glorify or the glory in ourselves. Pride makes us self-centered. It's about us. It's about me. I save myself. I do these things to myself. And essentially it makes no place for God. So it is important. However, I do want us to spend majority of our time here today thinking about ourselves. There needs to be an internal, because I could talk about pride all day long, but it doesn't do you any good. We can study about pride all day long, but it doesn't do you any good. I could talk to you about Greek words and Hebrew words, and you could walk away being able to talk about this in the most profound theological terms, but it won't do you any good until you begin to look on the inside to see whether or not you are someone who has been infected by pride. Is pride keeping you from becoming the person that you need to be, responding to situations as we should? Is it keeping us from being godly people, taking on the character of a Jesus and becoming as our Father? So therefore, we need to take time to do a self-examination. And so what I'm going to do this morning, because there's no question that pride is harmful. It hurts us. Now, the Bible does talk about a good pride. It talks about a rejoicing type of pride and an excellence type of pride. But we're not talking about that. So let's not play word games. And I'm asking that you take this seriously. Pay attention, wake up right now, and really focus internally. As difficult as this can be sometimes, it is imperative that we get this. It is imperative. So am I prideful? Well, let's start with the easy stuff. Do you desire recognition? Do you desire the VIP statuses I think Jesus talked about in Luke chapter 11? The chief seats. And there was those in Jesus' day who desired this VIP status, this recognition for certain things that they did or for who they were, which Jesus said was nothing more than emptiness. Do you desire recognition? Do you think of yourself to be in such a place where you have nothing to learn from people you think are below you? Or people who haven't achieved as much or don't have as much status as you. On the flip side of that, we stop learning from people who we're envious of because you can't learn from something or from someone you're jealous of. And so in any situation, do we see ourselves as having arrived, as it were, or even if not having arrived, in comparison to other people, do we ever see ourselves going into just a situation thinking we have nothing to learn? We're going to show them what it is about. I'm telling you, we can learn from the smallest infant and their response to God in situations. We can learn from the oldest of wisdom. And yeah, you can even learn from a Cajun. And I can learn from Texans. Texans are prideful, let me tell you. But do you see yourself in a situation where you feel like you cannot learn from this person because of certain things? You may be prideful. Are you reluctant to share the spotlight and reluctant to let anyone lead or get credit? Do we micromanage? Do we police? Are you reluctant to take the spotlight off of yourself in any situation? Do you resent the success of others? Do you point out flaws in other people, but rarely admit your own flaws? See, because it's easy to point out the flaws of other people, but my flaws, see, that's between me and God. Do you point out flaws in other people, but rarely admit your own? Do you find it difficult to admit that you've made mistakes, whether in the workplace, whether in the home, whether in other certain relationships? Do you refuse to back off an argument even though you know you have lost? How many times have you been in an argument with your significant other, and by the time that argument ended, you forgot what you were arguing about because you were just so focused on winning, on having the last word in any situation? You refuse to back off an argument even though you know you have lost, even though you know that you were wrong. You find it difficult to say sorry even when you know that you're wrong. You may be prideful. Are you afraid to say, I don't know? Sometimes that's a hard thing to admit. Do you look down on those who are less educated, less affluent, less refined, or less successful than yourself? Do you think of yourself more spiritual than others? Do you have a judgmental spirit towards those who don't make the same lifestyle choices, dress standards, or how you school your kids? Are you quick to find fault with others and to verbalize those thoughts to others? Do you have a sharp, critical tongue? Do you feel frequently correct or criticize your spouse, your boss, or others in leadership positions? Are you driven to receive approval, praise, or acceptance from other people? Do you tend to be controlling of your spouse, of your children, of your friends, of your coworkers, or any other groups of peoples or people that you might be around? Do you frequently interrupt people when they are speaking? You might be prideful. Does your spouse feel like they can never measure up to your expectations? Do your children feel that way? Do you talk about yourself too much? That's a trick question. Because you can talk about yourself too much and say, I don't talk about myself enough. I don't talk about myself too much. If you don't know that, ask someone else who's close to you. Are you more concerned about your problems, your needs, your burdens than about others? Does the conversation always come back to you? Are you overly concerned about your reputation or your family's reputation? You may be prideful. Are you overly concerned about what other people are going to think about you and your situation, even though they don't know all of the variables? And because they don't know all of the variables, you're going to try to paint a certain picture. Because if they think about certain things, you know where their mind's going to go, and you know where their mind's going to go because that's where your mind goes. You may be prideful. Do you neglect to express gratitude even for the little things to God, to other people? Are you overly concerned about other people thanking you for what you have done? Do you neglect prayer at intake of the word? Do you get hurt if your accomplishments or your acts of service are not recognized or rewarded? Do you have a hard time being told what to do? Are you sitting here thinking how many of these questions apply to someone you know, feeling pretty good that none of these really apply to you? Yeah, some of you got that. You may be prideful. Simply put, pride is you looking at you for your needs. You save yourself. You heal yourself. You keep yourself from harm. But if you got your life, if we have our life so much under control, where does God fit into the picture? And David himself pondered the same question in Psalm 10:4. In his pride, he says, the wicked man does not seek him, God. And all his thoughts there is no room for God. See, pride has to go so that God could truly reign over our thoughts, over our actions, and over our lives. We need to see and be okay with ourselves and how ill-equipped we are to deal with our weaknesses. We need to be okay with who we are and be willing to acknowledge that I don't have this under control, that I don't have it all figured out, and that I need help. Paul understood this very thing, that dressing up one's insecurities, which is oftentimes what it amounts to, dressing those up those insecurities in pride doesn't make it any better. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul talks about these thorns in the flesh, and then now specifically how he begged the Lord, verses 8 and 9, he begged the Lord to take it away. He's very intentional about that. He begged the Lord, and we can argue about what these thorns in the flesh were all day long. But here's the point. He begged the Lord to take it away. It was something that caused some insecurities here. He begged the Lord to take it away, but each time he said, "My grace is all you need." And these are the words that need to resonate within us. He says, "My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast," he says, or rejoice in, as it were, my weaknesses. In other words, I'm okay with that. Not that he allows it to fester and grow and leaves it alone, but he's okay with it. Why? He says, listen, this is where I've been. This is what I do. I'm okay with this. I'm not going to hide these insecurities, these things that are in my life, whatever they are. He says, I boast so that the power of Christ can work through me. In other words, exposing our weaknesses gives God the opportunity to display his power. That's your story. That's my story. You lay bare the things that have happened in your life or where you are. It's the whole confessing thing, laying it out there, being transparent and say, hey, look, this is who I am. I'm not faking it. I'm not faking it till I'm making it. I'm a disciple that's being worked on. And I'm okay with that. But when I tell you my story, because of my weaknesses, you're going to see God's power in that. And so hiding our insecurities behind pride doesn't make it any better. Laying them bare, opening them up, being okay with that actually displays and allows the power of God to work in our lives. Now, in order to do this, though, here's the antidote. Humility. And humility is not easy. Pride is referred to as the cause of all sin, and humility is referred to as the mother of all virtues. Humility. Humility does not mean degradation or remorse. It does not mean effecting some sort of demeaning external behavior. It does not mean to consider oneself as the most vile and loathsome creature. Christ was humble, and this is not how he acted. These are not the things that he did. And so that's not what humility is. Genuine humility means to see reality as God sees reality, as reality actually is in God, which means that we have to be okay. We got to know oneself and others as God sees them and knows them. That's what humility is. It means to know yourself and who you are even without God. Being able to see that. Seeing the reality of that. It causes humility. That is what genuine humility is. And that's how we wage war against pride. Humility. And so, while first step here is being okay, not hiding our insecurities, whatever they are, not hiding behind the shell called pride. It's about, first of all, being okay with who you really are behind this facade that we try to paint. In any realm. Doesn't matter if it has to do with sin or just accepting help from someone. Pride doesn't do us any good. It's not going to help us out. And in fact, it hinders the power of God being displayed in our lives. So the first step is becoming okay with who we are. That's where I am. I'm not perfect, but I'm not who I used to be, and I'm not who I'm going to become. But I'm okay with where I'm at right now because I'm still working on it. I am a disciple who is being worked on. But what are some other practical ways, other things that we need to do to help us take a posture of humility? And this is really serious. This isn't as energy-packed, right, as last week. This is a little bit more sombering and sober, right? You're not going to leave out of here like you just came from a pep rally because this is serious. We're getting down to the root of some of the issues that we're having to face here. Pride is not something that's easy to talk about. It's not something that's easy to face. Humility is easier said than done, especially when you live in a world and a culture where humility is viewed as a weakness. But the reality is it is an immense strength of people who are willing to humble themselves to the will of another. It is easier to consider the thoughts and the desires and the needs that I have and more difficult for me to take my mind off of myself and put it onto someone else and to take their needs above my own. That is a difficult thing for us to do. And because it's a difficult thing for us to do, it is that much more important that we understand and get to the bottom of it. And so, how do we become humble people? It's not something that's not a pill you can drink, and not you can take, or a drink that you can drink. It's not some food you can eat. It's not some discipline, some practice you can go through. While those things are helpful, pride is something that comes from within our hearts. Humility is something that comes from within our hearts. And so we have to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. And we have to be willing to go through the training that it takes that mold and shape us by following in the steps of Jesus and living as he did. And so there's some real tangible things that we can do. Simply put, if you want to take a stance, a posture of humility, and you want your heart to really be converted and transformed into one that demonstrates a humble spirit, you got to do the opposite of what pride does. I'm not going to fool you. I'm not going to make you think that there's some magical pill here. You're prideful, and if you're prideful, you act in a prideful way. And at first, you're not going to want to not be prideful. You may just want to work on becoming humble because you know prideful is a thing that God fights against. But you still want to be prideful. Let's just be honest. It's not an easy thing. When someone comes face to face with their temptation, with their sin, with the things that they have to change in their life, oftentimes they want to make the changes because their life is so messed up, but oftentimes they're not really necessarily ready to make those changes, to take the steps necessary to make lasting change. It's a difficult thing because they still want to do the thing that's causing them so much harm. Pride is not an easy thing to get over. It's not. I know this firsthand. It's not. So, first of all, what do I do? Come to grips with who you are. It's okay. Let God shine through your weaknesses. But secondly, just do the opposite of what pride tells you to do. That's what humility is. That's what it looks like. If you want to be more humble, do what humble people do. Work on being grateful and thankful. And you're not going to always be grateful. And you're not going to always be thankful. But express it anyway. And some people say that's faking it till you make it. I say no. It's discipleship and training. Because it is the right thing to do. These disciplines are helping mold and shape us into something much better. Just like these other disciplines, which were evil desires, molded and shaped us into something that is less desirable in God's eyes. These things will make us more desirable and become more and more like Jesus. And so let's do the opposite. Let's be grateful and thankful, which means you may have to think about that a bit. You may have to think about, okay, I really should be grateful and thankful that this is happening, even in spite of all these other things. How do I express this? How do I get to a place where I can express gratefulness and it be genuinely heartfelt? Adopt a posture of serving rather than being served. That helps. Be happy to help out and be anxious to share what you have. Don't mind doing the dirty work. Nothing is below you. when you adopt a humble stance. Adopt a posture that says, I can learn from anyone. Take notes from everyone. And eventually it'll begin to chip away at that pride because you begin to see the reality. Yes, I can learn from other people in other positions who may not be as wealthy or have as much education, or maybe not live in this type of house or do this type of job. It doesn't mean that we cannot learn from the lowest to the greatest. When you realize that reality, it naturally chips away at that pride. Be willing to push others in the spotlight. Rejoice in the success of others, and the rejoicing in the success of others has the power to break the stranglehold of envy in your life. Confess and address your own sins before helping others address their sins. Get in the habit of confessing privately and publicly. When helping others, it will truly be with grace and humility. When I help other people who struggle with the same things I have struggled with, or maybe continue to struggle with, my response to them is quite a bit different now that I have actually confessed and opened my heart up, and allowing people to see the reality of that. It forces you to respond to that in such a way where you understand. And it's going to be loving. It's going to be in the posture of grace and humility. Admit your mistakes. The sooner you admit your mistakes, the sooner you find a resolution, the sooner you can move on, the sooner you can grow. Admit your mistakes. It's okay. It doesn't make you less human or less of a man or less of a woman to admit that you were wrong. And the sooner you do it, the better off you'll be. Remember, you are a Christian because of who and how good God is, not how good you are. Be willing to make the first move towards reconciliation, regardless of who you think holds the ball. Be willing to make the first move to reconciliation. Learn to choose your battles, because there are some you just cannot win, even if you know you're right. Sometimes it's okay to let your wife win. It's okay. And finally, false humility. False humility is pride. False humility is pride. Listen, it doesn't make you less of a person to admit that you don't know something. It doesn't make you less of a person to admit that you're not perfect, you don't have it all together. Like, really admit that, right? Because it's easy to come into a place like this and we all say we're transparent and we don't have it together, and if it wasn't for Jesus fighting our battles and any other language we want to use, right, it sounds good, it makes us sound like this is where we are. But the reality is that's not where we are. It's not where we are. It's okay to admit I don't have it all together, because you know what? Here's a news flash. I ain't got it all together. And neither do you. I know it. Everybody else around you knows it. You're the only one who doesn't see it necessarily. That's how pride works. It doesn't make you less of a person to admit you're not perfect and don't have it all together. It doesn't make you less of a person to admit you need help. It doesn't make you less of a person to be humble. It doesn't make you less of a person to admit you are not humble. And that's the first step, is it not? It doesn't make you less of a person to admit that you're prideful, and it doesn't make you less of a person to admit that you're not humble. It doesn't make you less of a person to admit this is something I struggle with, and this is something that is keeping me from becoming the person that God would have me to be. Pride. It's very dangerous. Very dangerous. Very sneaky, because it blinds us. It'll keep us from realizing people, and not in a good way. I take pride and boast in Jesus, not in myself. But oftentimes, my responses indicate that I take pride and I boast in myself, and not in Jesus. Now, that's something that'd be difficult for you to come to grips with. And so as we wrap up, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for all of us, because pride is so lethal. so destructive. It keeps us from uniting. It keeps us from responding in ways that are proper. It keeps us from having unity when we disagree on something. That's pride. It breaks up homes. It breaks up marriages. It causes relationships to go awry. It causes us to be people that others do not want to be around. It causes us, and it has the power to cause our children to not want to have anything to do with you. It causes people to want to ignore and avoid you. It's pride. Father, have mercy on us, sinners. For oftentimes, Father, we are people, prideful hearts. Help us to shed all those things that we tried to hide behind because we are so afraid of our insecurities. Help us to ignore what other people may say or think, or what we think they're going to say or think. Help us to loosen the grip, the power that other people have over us, and they don't even know it. It keeps us, Father, from being able to be okay with who we are as we work and as you work on us and as we're transformed into you. Help us to remove these obstacles. The obstacle of pride brings about so much jealousy and anger and rage and envy and hypocrisy and lies. Keeps us from telling the truth and from facing who we really are. It stunts us from growing, and it causes us to be planted as something other than your Son. Help us, Father, to see times when pride has consumed our hearts. Give us the wisdom that we need to do what it takes to respond to these things differently. And in those moments, Father, when we are prideful, give us the strength in that moment to stop and make it known, to ask for forgiveness, to apologize, to be willing to back off, to say we're wrong. This week, Father, as we think about who we are, in those moments when we're prideful, and if we are even prideful, I pray that you would make it known, that you would show us ways, prick our hearts, and show us the ways in which pride seeps into our lives and in our responses to our thoughts. Give us the power to counteract that. And in doing so, take a posture of humility. Pray that your light will shine through us as that pride is torn away. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In James chapter 4, it's a passage we use. The Bible says that God opposes the proud, but he favors the humble. And in verse 7, this is interesting. He says, so humble. You do something humble. You submit yourselves before God. See, when we're prideful, God opposes us. And so it's like a fight against God. But he says, to counteract that, you submit yourselves before God. And then he says, you resist. And said, you stop fighting against God and you start resisting. The word resist there means to oppose, to stand against. In other words, you stop waging war against God and you start waging war against Satan, against pride. And he says, listen, you humble yourself before God. You resist the devil and he will flee from you. How do I resist? I humble myself to God and I respond in a way contrast to pride. I pray that we find ourselves doing this very thing this week. As we close, if you have a need, if you need prayer, if you need help, you need someone to talk to, if you want to understand a little bit more about this whole pride thing, I'll be up here. Some other people will be up here to pray with you, pray for you. I hope that you guys have an amazing week of worship.